Hi, it's Kirby Summers, and I welcome you to my true crime podcast. As most of you know, I have been working on a new series called Deconstructing Wexner. To date, it's probably been the most read series that I've written for my Substack, or previous to that, to my Epstein Project newsletter. And it's a really important look at the history of Wexner's parents, their history, who their early connections are, and how these interconnect with not just the mob, frankly, who have been a part of many politicians' lives multi-generationally, but also to the intelligence agencies. And once again, not just limited to the United States. So before I get started, because I'm going to share most of part 5 with you today, as much as I can, and I need to include the years that these people were born, okay, along with the years they died. And I'm going to try to get through as much as I can. If for some reason I don't finish everything in this podcast, I'll add a second one to at least get part 5 out, to you guys who follow me on YouTube. Before I get started, please like the podcast. And if you haven't subscribed, take a second to do so. So I published this on Sunday, and you may not recognize some of the names because these people were maybe introduced in earlier segments, installments of this series. However, I'm going to just try to, as I said, share as much as I can. So here's the beginning. Neither Joseph Chanthal or Herschel Kabakov selected Ohio randomly. Chanthal made the move in 1887 to what was already the oldest Jewish community in the United States. Between 1817 to 1819, the first Jews to settle in Cincinnati were Joseph Jonas, Louis Cohen, Jonas Levy, and David Israel Johnson, all of whom were from England. The latter had a son, Frederick Augustus Johnson, born in 1821, died in 1893, known as the first Jew born in Cincinnati. They were members of the world's oldest secret society, the Freemasons. Crime, prostitution, and drinking were the law of the land, and with little to no law enforcement, early Jewish settlers created their own world of vice and pleasure. Chanthal and Johnson, who became a public official and legislator in Cincinnati, were friends. Johnson founded Schenley Industries, which became the nation's largest distiller for half of the 20th century. His daughter, Elizabeth, married Solon Rosenstiel, whose son, Louis Rosenstiel, born 1891 to 1976, took over the family liquor business. Rosenstiel was a gangster and a sexual blackmailer who used children as prey. His close friend was controversial attorney Roy Cohn, born 1927, died in 1986. In 1968, Rosenstiel sold Schenley to Meshulam Riklis, born 1923, died in 2019, my abuser's father. Riklis and his friend Robert Maxwell, born 1923 to 1991, both served in the British Army during World War II and were enlisted as spies for the United Kingdom. After the war, Riklis, with the help of the United States government via Hubert Humphrey, born 1911 to 1978, then mayor of Minneapolis and later vice president under Lyndon Baines Johnson, was tucked away at Ohio State University as a covert spy where he and Leslie Wexner would happen to meet. Little is publicly known about how the Office of Strategic Services, formed in 1943 and precursor of the CIA, and British intelligence, MI5, MI6, worked together on a covert program known as Ultra. The CIA would later use the British code name Ultra for their covert mind control program, MK Ultra. British intelligence convinced OSS head William J. Donovan to form a counterintelligence division similar to their own. The Brits wanted a central intelligence office in the US that would serve as a liaison with London on the highly secretive Ultra program. Donovan agreed, and MI6 provided training to their new American counterparts. The London office became the center of American counterintelligence operations, which helped British intelligence maintain tight control over what they shared with the United States. And then I went on to include a private letter sent from then Vice President Humphrey to Rickless in 1965, acknowledging his help in making him and his family American citizens. So from the very beginning, the United States government is, and really from years earlier, the United States government is working with mobsters and spies. And as you'll see, before the OSS, there was something else, which I will come to shortly. Humphrey went on to become a staunch and vocal supporter of the Zionist movement. And then I show a photo of him with David Ben-Gurion, who was born in 1886 and died in 1973, a Russian immigrant who was the first to sign the Israeli Declaration of Independence, became the first minister of Israel, and is remembered as Israel's founding father. Gurion was known for his affinity of the Bolsheviks' use of violence to overcome opposition. It's well known today that Rosenstiel and Roy Cohn, who represented, among many others, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York, ran a child sex trafficking ring similar to Epstein's. They, like Rickless, were linked to Meyer Lansky, who was born in 1902, died in 1983, and blackmailed high-level politicians such as FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Lansky, like Leslie Wexner's parents and their benefactor Chantal, was born in Tsarist Russia. And then I show a photo of Lansky in the Rickless-owned Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas. Lansky was a covert intelligence asset for the Office of Naval Intelligence, formed in 1882. Formed in 1882. Right, yeah, sorry. It's just that I'm reading my notes here. Okay, so Lansky was a covert intelligence asset for the Office of Naval Intelligence. So the Office of Naval Intelligence was formed in 1882, and Lansky became an asset during World War II. The Riviera was built by Chicago mob boss Tony Joe Batters Accardo and Lansky's allies. They opened on April 20th, 1955, with the flamboyant Liberace as its first act. This is the hotel that inspired Martin Scorsese's 1995 epic film that many of us know as Casino. It had Robert De Niro, Sharon Stone, Joe Pesci. Not included in the movie is that the hotel was used as a CIA safe house. In 1998, Catherine K. Griggs, the wife of Marine Colonel George Griggs, a wet ops mind control assassin for the United States government, gave a 7.5-hour-long interview to her pastor, Rick Strawcutter. She shared the secrets of the U.S. military, the rape of young soldiers, drug running, weapon sales, secret camps of assassins, and the elite. She also describes the Riviera Hotel as being a safe house for CIA assassins and operatives. Rosenstiel, a bisexual who married 5 times, was known for his interest in minor boys. Like Epstein, he had many friends in high places. Some of these were in other countries, such as Winston Spencer Churchill, born 1874, died in 1965, who was Britain's most famous prime minister. And here's the thing, I don't know if you know this, but Churchill was a distant cousin to Princess Diana, and both of them were also related to George Washington, the first president of the United States and most celebrated Freemason. So, Freemasonry is tied into this entire, let's say, covert world that we don't see. Rosensteel's obituary states that Winston Churchill gave him advance notice of the repeal of Prohibition, at which point he began to accumulate a supply of aged whiskey. In 2018, novelist Lord Michael Dobbs claimed that Churchill was probably sexually abused as a boy. Dobbs researched the life of Churchill for several of his books. During a talk entitled Churchill, The Origins of Greatness, he provided a vivid account of how at age 8, Churchill was stripped naked by the founder of his boys' school and repeatedly whipped. He went on to tell the Chalk Valley Historical Festival that Churchill, was neglected, he was abused physically, emotionally, and probably sexually too. And while no one has written about whether Churchill had been sexually compromised by Rosensteel, it's well within reason to believe he was. Moreover, in an article, it appeared in 2017, there was like a slew of articles that had information about him being a prolific pedophile, about Churchill. These were immediately scrubbed. I mean, if you go even into the Wayback Machine, you'll see that they're scrubbed. However, among the other people named in these kind of pages that have been made to disappear are Sir Edward Heath and Peter Mandelson. We know that Mandelson is in Epstein's Black Book and was also photographed with him on several occasions, not just that photo we've all seen of Mandelson putting on a white belt, by the way, but also Mandelson in Epstein's apartment in France, in Paris, for his birthday. And there are some other photos of the two together. The thing that most people seem to be stuck with regarding the Epstein thing is that it wasn't just girls, it was also boys, because not everyone that is involved had a preference for girls. In any event, I'm going to continue. Churchill became an avid supporter of Zionism and lent his voice into decriminalizing homosexuality in the UK. And then there's a photograph of Churchill as Secretary of State during his visit to what was then called Mandatory Palestine, Tel Aviv, in 1921. Cohen, we all know he was a closeted homosexual, shared Rosensteel's deviant proclivities. Richard Kerr, a survivor of sexual abuse at the Concora's boys' home and a victim of Jimmy Savile's, also named Cohen as one of his abusers. Kerr outed a number of high-level politicians, including Lord Mountbatten. Mountbatten, as many of you might know, was Prince Philip's uncle, and he was a mentor to King Charles. And Charles, as most of you probably are aware, was very friendly with Savile, had a very, very long relationship with Savile. And this connection between a child P ring in the United States to a well-protected one in the UK can't be understated. In the last installment, so like in part 4 of Deconstructing Wexner, we see a connection between the CIA and 3 separate instances of, let's call it, S abuse. The Finders, McMartin Preschool, and the allegations against JCC. As we continue to examine the world into which Leslie Wexner was born, we can add Savile to this list. So while many people have read articles about Cohen, who later became Donald Trump's mentor and attorney, few, if any, delve into his background. None even mention Cohen's close friendship with Rickless. And then I share a photograph of Cohn attending a party in 1983 for Pia Zadora, who is Rickless's much younger wife. And the party was hosted by Bob Guccione, founder of the porn magazine Hustler. Sorry, Penthouse. So also in attendance at this party for Pia Zadora is Andy Warhol, who co-founded the New York Academy of Art, where Epstein was a board member from 1987 to 1994, and a regular fixture at the school. Warhol was founded by the Council of Cultural Freedom, which was revealed in 1966 as being created by CIA and its allies. If you don't know anything about the Council of Cultural Freedom, that's worth just even a quick Google search will give you the information on how this covert program was used to socially control what we saw as art, what we read as books, okay, like Lolita, written by Vladimir Nabokov. And, as I said in this article, which even gave us Andy Warhol. So then I go on to talk about a little bit more about Cohn's background, Joseph S. Marcus, and how that family, the Cohn ancestors, basically led the country into the Great Depression. Albert Cohn, born in 1885, died in 1959, Roy's father, was described by many as a shady social climber who married Dora, the daughter of Jewish-Russian immigrant Joseph S. Marcus, because of his money and crooked political connections. Marcus worked in the garment district in low-level positions, and along the way, somehow became a financier. That word is very familiar to us because of what Epstein was named, and a banker. Then I show an image of the bank in downtown. In 1906, Marcus founded the Public Bank, and then in 1913 opened the Bank of United States with well-known financiers whose names have been erased from history. The first branch of the latter was located at 77 Delancey Street on the Lower East Side and displayed a large portrait of the U.S. Capitol in their lobby. However, the bank had no ties to the U.S. government. And basically what they did is they used this as a ploy to attract immigrant Jews who knew little to no English into trusting them with their deposits. They advertised mainly in the Yiddish press, where their favorite phrase was, "The bank was as solid as the Bank of England." In 1921, Marcus went ahead and built a neoclassical building with elegant bronze torches at its entrance in the Bronx, which is basically the poorest neighborhood of New York. The exterior of the bank was made to look as if, it could be a trusted institution. This happens if you look at any bank, if you go to Wall Street and you look around, they're all built in a style that, that has the columns. It's made to look so that you can trust it. And that's a psychological ploy that fools many people into thinking, oh, my money is safe here. But it's been used historically. So when Marcus died in 1927, his son Bernard took over and expanded the initial 5 branches into 62 throughout New York City. However, it would be this seemingly innocuous bank in the Bronx that would kick off the Great Depression, which began in 1929 and lasted a full decade, ending only in 1939. On December 10, 1929, amid rumors of the bank's shaky finances, about 2,500 depositors stood in line to withdraw their money. One man waited 2 hours to empty a $2 savings account. By the end of the day, $2 million had been withdrawn. And there's actually a photograph. It was raining that day of hundreds of people with umbrellas waiting to get into the bank. Depositors and other branches formed lines the next morning, at which point on December 11th, Joseph Broderick, then New York Superintendent of Banks, closed the institution. The bank had over 4 million depositors, and its failure began one of the darkest economic periods in U.S. history. Marcus was convicted in 1931 of charges of misapplying funds, and after spending only 23 months in jail, he was pardoned by then Governor Herbert H. Lehman. Herbert is the scion of Lehman Brothers investment firm. It's the firm where Eli Black, born in 1921, 1975, Leon Black's father, you may know from some of my work on Substack, who was also another beneficiary of Epstein, got his start, and that's where he became CEO of the CIA's connected United Fruit Company. In 1908, Herbert joined the family business, meaning, the bank, the financial firm that was a family business, Lehman Brothers, and soon married Edith Altschul, whose father was affiliated with Lazard, and Lazard is another prominent investment banking house. Decades later, Lazard would become Leslie Wexner's financial advisor via Felix Rohatyn, who is yet again another connection of Epstein's. However, 4 years earlier, in 1924, Albert Cohn married Dora Gladys Marcus, securing his position within the Democratic Party and its political machine. After becoming the first assistant district attorney for Bronx County, he was appointed to the Supreme Court by Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt, and that's before his 1932 election as President of the United States. In 1937, Governor Lehman promoted him to the New York Supreme Court Appellate Division, where his fellow justice included Erwin Untermeyer. Untermeyer was born in 1886, 1973. Erwin's father, Samuel Untermeyer, born in 1858 and he died in 1940, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful attorneys in America. By 1922, he had accumulated an estimated $50 million, and among his clients was the controversial firm, which I've already named, United Fruit. United Fruit, as some of you may know, changed the economic and political development of several Latin American countries. And Untermeyer is known for having helped to write the legislation that led to the creation of the Federal Reserve. In 1899, he built a very large estate, like a 150-acre estate known as Greystone in Yonkers, New York, which is just north of Manhattan along the Hudson River. He had a massive garden, which he employed like 60 gardeners. After his death in 1940, he bequeathed 15 acres to the city of Yonkers, at which point it became known as Untermeyer Park and Gardens. The garden has a lot of mystical and ancient references, and among these is one for the British royal family. And I show a photograph of what the gardens looked like before they began to renovate them like a little over a decade ago, showing a beheaded horse, what looks like a beheaded horse, or let's call it like a headless horse, with a lion in front of what later became known as the Devil's Cave. Stephen Burns, who basically founded the Untermeyer Gardens I can't say the word at this time. I haven't had my coffee. Anyway, there's a group that conserves the park, and Stephen Burns is the person who founded it. he discovered in 2011 that the headless horse was actually a unicorn. The lion and the unicorn are the crest for the Great Britain and the British royal family. And you can just, on any search engine, Google crest for the British royal family, and you'll see the unicorn and the lion. It's a very famous image, and few people have connected this to Untermeyer Park. So here's the thing. Untermeyer Park and David Berkowitz, born on June 1st, 1953, but better known as the Son of Sam, became synonymous with satanic worship and ritual murders after his arrest on August 10th, 1977. Berkowitz also professed to be a disciple of the Process Church of the Final Judgment and follower of Satanist Anton LaVey. And then I show a logo of the Process Church, and I show photos of David Berkowitz and of the cave with the satanic signs and the upside-down cross. Maury Terry, a journalist who became obsessed with the Son of Sam case, reported that Untermeyer belonged to the secret society known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And then the image that I use for this podcast is connected to that secret society. It's a practice inspired by the Rosicrucians, a 17th century mystical cult, Freemasonry, and other non-Western religions. They used the secrets of alchemy and witchcraft, which eventually lured Aleister Crowley into becoming a member. Another member was Bram Stoker, known for his 1897 Gothic horror novel, Dracula. In 1996, the Yonkers Police Department reopened the Son of Sam case. Former NYPD officer Michael Cordella was put in charge and learned that in America, the Process Church had established ties with outlaw biker gangs, primarily to make money by running drugs, but also for human trafficking and other unsavory criminal activities. Cordella further alleges that one of his biker informants personally witnessed the process sacrifice a child. Now, here's the thing about the child. There were posters all over the city. The case became very famous. The child had been abducted, and the person who gave Cordella the information said that he saw this child being sacrificed. However, Cordella has never really named the child. And just as he was getting additional leads on this mysterious case and pretty much what seems to be an ongoing group based in the satanic arts, the police department shut the investigation down. When Berkowitz was arrested in 1977, he had Roy Cohn's phone number in his pocket. Many of you may have never heard that, but that information was readily found. It was even in the Wikipedia pages in the talk section before Epstein's arrest in 2019, at which point all reference of David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam, having Roy Cohn's phone number in his pocket disappeared. So then there's just another little piece that I wanted to include here before returning back to the Kabakov family, who's basically the parents of on the maternal side of Leslie Wexner. And that's Charles Louis Fleischman and Elizabeth Holmes. So similar to Chantal, and again, Chantal, I introduced, I believe, I don't know, in part 3 or I believe in part 3, I introduced who Chantal is. He's very important in this story. Similar to Chantal, Charles Louis Fleischman born in 1835 to 1897, was an immigrant from Austria under the Habsburg monarchy. He settled in Ohio and founded the Fleischmann Yeast Company in Cincinnati in 1868. Charles and his wife Henriette had 3 children. Julius Augustus, born in 1871 through 1925. Betty Fleischman Holmes, born 1873, died in 1941, and Max, born in 1877, died in 1951. Julius became Cincinnati's youngest mayor in 1900 at the age of 28. Both he and his brother Max were Freemasons and members of the Avon number 542 Lodge. When his father Charles died, he took charge of the company and became the world's leading producer of cake yeast and, quote, America's first commercial producer of gin. I didn't go into his connections to the military, but you can do some of that research on your own. Their sister Betty married a Danish emigre, Dr. Christian Ramus Holmes. He was born in 1858 and he died in 1920. In 1892, Elizabeth Holmes, whose name I'm sure you're familiar with, was born on February the 3rd, 1984, is the couple's I'm sorry, only 2 greats. She's the couple's great-great-granddaughter, and she's the founder and CEO of the fraudulent blood testing company Theranos. It should be noted that her father, Christian Holmes IV, is also a descendant of Charles Fleischmann. He was vice president of the scandal-ridden Enron Corporation. In 2001, it was discovered that the firm perpetuated one of the biggest accounting frauds in history. 22 employees were convicted for their involvement. I don't know if you guys remember the Enron scandal, but if you haven't, you should take a look at that. David Boies, known for representing 60 plus Epstein victims, and who we now know is a gatekeeper, was a board member at Theranos, and he was also their attorney. So we have seen photos, and these, by the way, are being quickly scrubbed off the internet, of Boies with Elizabeth Holmes. And so here's what Boies did. He employed private investigators. We know that he did the same thing for Harvey Weinstein when he hired the Israeli-based firm Black Cube to keep anyone from reporting on the Theranos fraud. John Carreyrou, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but we all know him as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, realized that he and his informers were being spied on by Boies, but he continued to write a series of articles exposing the fraudulent practices of the multi-billion-dollar testing company. Eventually, we know from, what's been shared, and only a little bit has been shared, frankly, by mainstream media, although this guy's book is a good read. He did expose them, and he exposed the very even he was stunned by how far David Boies went into trying to silence, bully, how he put spies on anyone investigating the Theranos fraud. We see this historically happen. We go back into how Epstein tried to keep the victims from speaking in Palm Beach, and throughout history, the people in that circle that goes all the way back in history and connects to Wexner's ancestors in Ohio. This is something that they have used, which kind of kept the lid on a lot of these connections. Like, I'm sure you never heard of Jimmy Savile being connected to, let's say, the origins of Wexner in Ohio. So this is the world, full of interconnected and multi-generational criminals and spies, that Bella Kabakov would rear her son, Leslie Wexner. If you haven't been a member of my Substack, there's a lot more. We're only in part 5 of this installment, Deconstructing Wexner. And I knew that I had to trace not just his life, but his very, very early days, because I knew there were hidden connections that nobody has put together. Um, in the meanwhile, I hope you enjoyed this part of it. And if you want to read more, come on over to my Substack. Please remember to give this a like and subscribe if you haven't done so. All right, guys, have a good day. Bye.